Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, an island show that likes to cast a light on local issues, provincial, national, international, whatever's going on. We like to cast a light on it. And shining that light along with me is the Croatian sensation himself, John Jurisic. And John, uh, what a week we have, and lots of pomp and ceremony.
Well, we can honestly say, pretty much guaranteed, that this kind of pomp and ceremony happens to most of us once in a lifetime, and that being the monarchy and everything about the monarchy. I'll admit, that Canadians love a show, and they love a lot of people will be tuning into the coronation of Prince Charles III. Man, I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to really fully admit that he's king. I enjoy a little bit of pomp and circumstance here and there. I certainly don't come from a background that sort of relished in that sort of thing. Although I will, for one, be sleeping through all of the royal going-ons during the morning, early morning, and I won't be feeling too bad about that at all, Robin.
Well, John, I come from a family that's very, very monarchist. I'm British on both sides, lots of relatives, Scottish and English, who are big supporters of the royal family and always very keen on the royals. I consider it very much a part of my heritage. And I also feel as a Canadian, it's part of our collective heritage. We've always had the monarchy. And Charles is going to be the King of Canada. That's part of his title. He's not just the King of the United Kingdom, he is the King of Canada. So as long as that stands, I think it's kind of important. And, I will be staying up, or at least getting up in the middle of the night to watch some of the ceremony, and we'll be talking a lot about that. And, Charles, among other things, is also going to be the honorary commander-in-chief of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And there was a ceremony. The Mounties will be taking part in the ceremony, of course, and watching those overnight proceedings from the Union Club will be a big crowd of people. So all in all, John, not just me, but all in all, congratulations to King Charles III.
Yay. I hope that we might get some video from that mid-morning Union Club watching of the coronation. That would be fun. Anyway, we'll have more to discuss next week about the royals, obviously, and the royal fallout with Harry and Meghan. But let's turn to, everything's serious, everything that we do, but a more impactful activity that's happening at home. That is the issue of the catch and release of very dangerous criminals and personalities, and the open use of drugs with calls for a free, safe supply. The Enough is Enough organization certainly up in arms about this, as they expressed on the lawns of the legislature.
When 2 years ago, with my wife and two young boys, and within 1 month of moving there, we had somebody overdose and die on our property. And when I asked the police, or I asked the city what could be done, one of the first things they said was write your MLA. And I was like most of you too. You write your MLA and you get some canned response.
So we'll have more on this because we'll be talking to former Detective Sergeant Chris Horsley from the Saanich Police in just a moment. He's a retired cop with plenty to say about crime enforcement, our problems with street narcotics, and all of those issues. And we're really going to get into that in a moment's time. But first, we've got some viewer mail, John.
Boy, do we ever. Thank you to everyone who's writing in, despite what you're saying, either contrary or supportive of John and Robin. Stacy Diane writes, why does this appear to fall on deaf ears? No community responsibility, no leadership accountability. Between these two non-actions, we now have successfully burnt out our first line of defense. That's disgraceful. Addiction is a symptom of a sick community.
And Jerry, who writes us fairly often, had these thoughts. I saw this developing 30 plus years ago, but the suits wouldn't listen. They could have nipped this in the bud in the 80s. We need an automatic life sentence for dealers and perhaps the electric chair. Serious. I'm angry at all levels of government. They talk to get reelected and then they do nothing but wait for their pensions.
Well, Jerry, that's quite a pessimistic view of life. However, we welcome all commentary. For example, Pierre writes, these drugs are causing havoc in every hamlet, town, and city in Canada. Boy, I don't deny that. Is there any way we can get rid of them completely?
That's a question a lot of us wonder about, and I think we just throw our hands in the air, and it's a very discouraging time. Mark asks this question: any connection to the prolonged isolation of COVID mandates, Robin? There were warnings about the psychological dangers of that. And you know, I really do appreciate hearing from Mark. He's an old newspaper veteran, and I actually worked with him a number of years ago. It's great to see he still keeps his hand on the pulse of these issues. And regarding the COVID mandates, yeah, there was a lot of psychological distress around that, a lot of pressure on all of us. I think it was tough on everybody's mental health. I would say, though, that the COVID pandemic came on much later than we'd already seen this terrible rash of deaths and destruction because of narcotics and all the stuff on the streets, the mental health issues, all of that was already exploding before COVID came on the scene. So I would think that this issue is more complex, as perhaps we're about to discover.
Yeah, we sure are. Great interview, Robin, with Chris Horsley, detective staff sergeant with the Saanich Police that served on their force for nearly 30 years. Today, he works on a part-time contract with the Oak Bay Police, another hamlet within Lower Vancouver Island. So he's still in the game and very familiar with what's happening on the street. We wanted to hear from him directly how he feels the issues of homelessness and addiction are being dealt with. So let's zoom him in.
And now joining us in the Rumble Room for the first time is Chris Horsley. And Chris is a former detective sergeant, as detective staff sergeant from Saanich, and just so great to have you on the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And Chris, you're a veteran police officer. You've seen the enforcement game for a long time, almost 30 years in Saanich. You're still working part-time in Oak Bay. How much has policing changed since you started?
Well, there's been significant changes, and unfortunately, most of them are significant new challenges for police officers. But I mean, the basics are still the same. You know, you're still interacting with the community, but yeah, there's lots of changes. It's you have to be pretty smart cookie now in policing to keep up with a lot of the new, not just changes in case law and the legal standards, but also changing in investigations and how we manage investigations, everything from disclosure to the courts through to technologies that have made basic investigations incredibly hard. You know, frauds over the internet and using social media and other platforms to commit criminal offenses have really, really changed the landscape.
But bringing IT in, I would have thought that was supposed to make it easier and faster and more effective.
In some ways, it is faster and more efficient. So having a computer in the car, for example, you have immediate access to driver's license records and all those databases. But with that also comes incredible costs for all the organizations. You know, the days of just having a manila file folder and maybe 20 pages are long, long gone. Every police investigation you do now is often hundreds and hundreds of pages. And that all has to be collated and organized and disclosed to Crown Counsel in a manner that meets the current standards. So yeah, it's a lot different than it was 30 years ago.
Are you having trouble keeping police, or a lot of guys getting out before they need to because they just can't stand it anymore? Or is there a lot of people on stress leave? I mean, how's it affecting police overall in terms of just morale and keeping the force up to staff numbers?
You know what, the stress leave or people that are off with PTSD has never been as high. It's incredible the number of people that are leaving. It's tough, resiliency, and even now there's lots of courses and lots of training and trying to prepare people so that their resiliency improves. But if it's just every day dealing with the same thing. I mean, I'm fortunate. I work for the Saanich Police. I work now for Oak Bay, but the people that are working in downtown Victoria or downtown Vancouver, it has to be like every time you go to one of these sudden deaths and have to do the next of kin notification, it strips a little bit of your humanity away from you. And it's hard to just do that for year after year without it taking a toll. There's nobody walking away in policing unscathed from doing this job. It's just not, that person doesn't exist.
Chris, it's absolutely fantastic having an officer with your experience and I think public relations savvy. I've seen you on TV a whole bunch of times, so that's really fun. But let's start to dig into some policy stuff, okay? Impacting our community. So when did the catch and release of prisoners start becoming an issue, really? And how frustrated are police, I suspect they are, about this reluctance to jail repeat offenders?
Yeah, thanks, John. There's a lot in that comment you just made. There's a lot of stuff to unpack there. When I got hired in the early 90s, I mean, there were still officers around who had worked in the 70s. And of course, I believe the Bail Reform Act was 1974 here in Canada. So prior to that, if you were arrested for an offense, you stayed in jail until you appeared in court. But of course, that all changed when we were granted the authority to release people on their own recognizance via undertakings and promise to appears. I think we've seen, though, a considerable shift. When I started, we were still arresting people and releasing them on those undertakings. But I think what we've seen now is significant change in the number of people that are actually held in custody. It seems to be reserved now for, the most serious of offenses. If you're arrested for anything even considered remotely minor, you're going to be released. If police have satisfied your identity and we've satisfied that we've gathered the evidence required to investigate that offense, you're likely going to be released. But the third thing that I didn't mention is referred to as the repetition and continuation of the offense. And that's, I think, where there's a lot of frustration building, because that grounds for release doesn't seem to hold much weight anymore. We've seen people commit multiple thefts and they're only being released again to commit the exact same theft. So at what point do we start to hold more weight and more accountability to prevent people from being back out to offend again? So these are complex issues, and that's why it's very hard to have anyone to speak on them, because is it a police thing? Is it a courts thing? Is it a Crown Council thing? Or is it actually a legislative issue, including case law? So there's a lot of balls in the air. And but the current standard we have right now is, unless it's an incredibly heinous event or crime that you've committed, you're probably going to be released.
It's interesting, though. It comes from a vantage point. Municipalities have to pay for the policing. And that's coming out of taxpayers on the municipal level, out of their home taxes and things like that. And then the province is now saying that actually British Columbia has one of the best records of keeping people detained in catch and release, although that seems to be a number that is being disputed. And then everybody's pointing at the federal government, saying it's really their fault because they set this whole catch and release up in the first place. And then it seems to be the police and even the lawyers are sort of stuck in the middle between what the politicians are saying and what they're actually doing, which has to add to the frustration.
It's very frustrating for law enforcement. I guess in some ways, we enforce the laws of the day. That's what we do. We march to whatever drum's currently being, beaten. And I think that goes in some part to just what's happening in the courts. I mean, you start your shift and you're going to deal with what you have to deal with that day. I think if you let the frustration of it all, I mean, you would probably get frustrated and wouldn't last very long in this line of work, because you're likely going to run into the person you arrested the day before again the very next day. And there's a bit of a resignation in policing that's just how it is in this province.
The optics that folks like myself and others see, obviously not police officers, on TV, and of course the challenges around homelessness are always highlights on the local news. How dangerous is it really for our police force and yourselves to work in 10 cities, homeless shelters, other facilities? Recently, there have been clearly some deaths around this interaction. These people that are in these tents are generally, I would suspect, addicts. They've got some real mental illness related problems. Are they a danger to others? Are they a danger to your community?
Well, we don't look at it in more of that global sort of, okay, homelessness, because I mean, it really varies. We have people that are homeless that are living in motor vehicles and they're working Monday to Friday. They have jobs, and we'll often encounter them parked on a side street. And if you do a check, yeah, they're homeless, but they're not a problem at all. They're simply functioning like everyone else in society. And you go to that other extreme where we have people that they're not even in a tent. They're just living outside because of mental health crisis, or they're in a form of addiction. Anybody, I guess, at any given time in their life can be deemed dangerous. And we've seen that across all socioeconomic, but there's certainly a propensity of mental illness connected to the homeless crisis. You check people, and you could argue that when does mental illness and addiction, when do those issues merge? But a lot of the people that are addicted are also mentally ill, and when they get in crisis, yes, there's an element of danger there. The public will wonder, why is there 3, 4, 5 police officers dealing with that one person? Usually because there's a history of that person maybe being in crisis and being a danger, not only to the police, but to the community at large. And of course, we often forget this, to themselves. A lot of these people can be a danger to themselves, and ultimately have to be apprehended, not criminally, but under the Mental Health Act.
I worked for the city of Vancouver during the Olympic year, and had a chance to hear quite a bit from the Vancouver police about the downtown east side. They did a study, and they estimated that as many as 70% of the IV drug users in the downtown east side were in fact suffering from various types of mental illness and mental dysfunction. And there was a lot of talk about maybe it wasn't a great idea to close Riverview. Maybe it wasn't a great idea to change the whole style of dealing with people that are distressed because they're having mental health issues. I think the original idea had been to let them out and put them in halfway houses, reintegrate them into the community. And a lot of that just didn't happen, and we've never cleaned up the mess.
There is a growing sort of groundswell of people recognizing that how these people are living, the ones that are truly in mental health crisis, that are living on the streets, sometimes in tents, sometimes they're not, maybe going from one shelter to the other. But often, we see them at night when most people are sleeping. You'll come across somebody, and it's like they're living in circumstances that, would a facility be, which is the lesser of the two evils? I understand why places like Riverview were closed, and why the public thought that, maybe putting these people out in the community was a better idea. But my personal opinion is, watching them live on street corners in the pouring rain without any shelter and, without being fed, to me, that's not the answer either. So certainly, I think there needs to be some changes. And often these people they have been clinically diagnosed with a mental illness, but there's a whole group of people there that have not been, and they're suffering from either a mental illness or some sort of mental trauma. It's frustrating because most police officers, we joined this job because we want to help people. We have incredible empathy for these individuals, and we see how they're living, and frankly, it's unacceptable.
Chris, there are several personal instances of seeing what is happening in the city. I ride my bike a lot into town. I come down on that Pandora side, Pandora and Cook, I believe, and I obviously see the tent city on Pandora. There are tents going up in parks throughout the region. I used to work down by Mayfair, and there was a hotel there. We used to go and have a drink up on the second floor there. And, the province is making these types of hotels, or not these types, but that one and others, making rooms available within these hotels and apartment blocks. But that doesn't seem to be working. What's wrong with that strategy to solve these problems?
Well, I mean, all you're doing is putting a roof over the problem. These people are still going out during the day. They're still in crisis. They still have all the same addictions or mental illnesses. All you're doing is putting a roof over them. So you're not really helping the root cause of the problem. Yes, it's great that they have somewhere warm to go and that they are staying dry. So I think housing is part of the answer. But a lot of the people that we are checking on the street, and I know other officers would agree, a lot of these people don't want to be in those houses. They just simply do not want to be housed in that manner. One of the number one answers they give us is that there's too many rules. So there's rules set aside to have that housing that they don't want to live within. And the other one, sadly, is they feel safer on the street than they do in the housing. Unfortunately, a lot of times there's a criminal element involved that are uh, not being checked, and they end up in the same housing, and that becomes problematic. Now, my understanding is a lot of the agencies running the housing are really working hard to weed that element out to make these places safer. But as it stands right now, people simply are making the choice not to take the housing because either they're not happy with it, it won't allow their dog to live with them, there's too many rules about visitors, or they simply feel unsafe in the housing.
We also have a situation with decriminalization, and you can walk around the streets now as long as it's just for your own personal use, I guess, to take drugs openly. And I see that the leader of the opposition, Kevin Falcon's, now saying that we should not have this activity in our public parks. We shouldn't have in public places. There should be some control on where these things are taken. And in the name of safe supply, advocates are saying, well, at least make the drugs safe. If you're going to have safe injection sites, have the drugs safe. But they're also not calling for the same idea of, I guess, stratifying where people can and can't take the drugs. What's your view of safe supply? And do you think that drug use should be allowed to take place anywhere in the community?
Well, the first part of your question, Robin, we're referring to the decriminalization, and of course, right now BC is the test province because the federal government has allowed this to happen. What have we seen as far as a difference? I've seen zero difference. The reason being that criminalization, I mean, drugs were de facto decriminalized here well over a decade ago. When's the last time that Crown Council approved a drug possession charge in British Columbia? I wouldn't have a clue because it's been that long. So nothing really has changed on the street. Yes, these people, now there's no power of arrest there because of the new rules. But even when there was the power of arrest, when officers were checking people with drugs, there was no recourse because we knew that often Crown Council simply were not going to ever charge anyone with that. Some of the questions that have come up with us, though, like one of the most recent things is, the policy is if I checked an individual with drugs and say they were arrested, example, they had a warrant for their arrest, when they get released, those drugs with their other personal possessions, like their wallet and their keys, go back to that individual. So they're not seized now. The problem I think that we have as police is, what if those drugs are tainted and we're handing them back and within 24 hours they kill that individual? So it becomes a dilemma for the police. And, the buzzword of safe supply is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. I think there's an authorized supply, but safe is a word I wish people wouldn't use. That's like saying safe bullets, right? Firearms are safe if they're used responsibly, but certainly bullets can kill you if they're misused, and even pharmaceutical grade narcotics will kill you if they're misused. So they're not safe. They're not safe in any way. If they're misused, they will still kill you. And the only benefit of having an authorized supply is we know it's not going to be tainted. There's people that are preying on these individuals. We've had so many deaths, so many. It's just, you start to wonder, well, who's left to take these drugs? Because we've had thousands. I mean, going to a sudden death drug overdose used to be a fairly, it happened, but it wasn't like a daily occurrence. It's happening so much now, and the drugs are just so powerful. And of course, the drugs to combat that ambulance crew and fire and police carry are becoming less and less effective because the drugs are changing. The illicit drug chain is changing. So In the short term, unfortunately, I don't see an end in sight. And people are trying. They're trying to do things, but it's like throwing a deck chair off the Titanic. I mean, you need significant change, or we're not going to see much change on the street.
We'll certainly have Chris Horsley back in the Rumble Room, Robin. Outstanding on the ground experiences and reflections. Thank you, Chris. So many issues, that police and other entire communities are facing. The big thing that sprung up for me is we need to spend more money on rehabilitation and mental health. And we need to get serious about it. And when I say serious about it, we need to do it or solve it or change the reality that we're currently in. Shutting down Riverview and other mental health facilities was a mistake. And not getting addicts into treatment in a major way is only leading to major headaches and more crime.
Couldn't agree more, John. And speaking of headaches for a moment, how about those poor people out in Langford who've just had to leave their home? It's just crazy what's happened. People vacating an apartment building that has been, for the most part, rendered unsafe for habitation for the second time in 4 years. An 11-story, 90-unit building has been shut down for the second time for faulty engineering and design. Is this the byproduct of buildings going up too fast without enough oversight? Well, we'll be digging into that question more next week. But John, it's now time, I guess, for us to, again, say goodbye and encourage our many valued viewers to stay on board with us. Here's how you can join the Rumble Room, follow us, and march on your merry way alongside us as we bring out the issues.
Robin, we're at over 900,000 plus cumulative viewers for the Rumble Room since we started 2 years ago. And soon we'll be over 1 million. Thank you to all of our viewers. Thank you. And I've been encouraged and prompted by people who say, well, you must be making a lot of money by doing that. And man, you must be raking in this subscriptions. I go, no, Robin and I are doing this for fun. We just love to do this work. Nonetheless, to satisfy some of those who feel we should at least allow an opportunity for people to sponsor, I will be coming up with some ways in which people can do that. So look forward to those solutions over the next several months. Nonetheless, if you'd like to hear more about all of this fun that we're having, come along and join our Facebook page, our Twitter page, and our YouTube site, which is garnering a bunch of views, as well as several news groups that we're involved with, as well as Instagram and TikTok. Always fun to watch and hear the reviews and comments that we're just tipping the iceberg earlier. There are so many more. So that wraps up a great show, Robin. So much fun. I remain your Croatian sensation, Johnny Juricic.
And I remain a staunch monarchist and proud Canadian, Robin Adair, and rumble on.